Okay, I'm back with episode number 5 of the McCormick estate. I ended the last one by saying that I was ready to leave for my trip to Russia, Georgia, Russia, for my tour. When I returned from my trip 1 month later, I was asked by Wayne Smith, again, I think I'll repeat this so you follow through. Wayne Smith of Friendship Force, if I would go on another more extensive tour representing the United States throughout Europe, performing for world leaders and presidents of various countries. I saw what was going on in the estate, which I explained to Wayne Smith of Friendship Force. I didn't think I could concentrate in preparing for such performances. They really wanted me and gave me another year to decide. He said, "We really want you to go on it, and we'll give you another year to decide," which was I thought, very gracious of them. However, I simply knew I could not concentrate enough on preparing for such an undertaking. And actually, former President Jimmy Carter and his wife, and I presume with others, they were all going to accompany me on the trip. So it was really a shame I couldn't go. My husband was always thrilled for me to get more exposure with my music. But it was due to the estate also. I mean, that was the main thing. I saw what was going on, and I had given my executive powers to them to make decisions. And of course, when I got back, I was so concerned about everything. It didn't enter my mind about that. So anyway, Glendora, here starts the process of destroying my music. I formed a group to help me, including interviewing attorneys. We had to interview a lot of attorneys, and I got advice from certain people. We formed a group, and there was it consumed a great deal of time and thought. And of course, if my husband were around, it would be quite different, wouldn't it? But he wasn't there. So if someone had told me that I'd have real problems with White & Case, a law firm, and the Bankers Trust Company, I basically just wouldn't believe them. I couldn't even believe it then. I never would believe them. I think my husband was too smart to let that happen to me. I simply wouldn't believe him. In fact, as everything unfolded, I just couldn't even believe it then. They were such good actors, accommodating my husband and myself like they were our real friends. So I'm doing this to make people aware of these silent thieves. They're very clever. I know of other prominent families, and even not so prominent, that they have done this too. In fact, the court has a leaflet stating a court for widows and orphans. Well, think again. It's a court for lawyers, banks, and con men. As I stated before, I've gone through 7 different attorneys, minus over $1 million, trying to get justice and helping my stepchildren, since they didn't get their inheritance either. It was suggested to me that I form protests, I picket, and I make it public. Since we were writing the bank different times, and we wouldn't get answers, or we'd get answers to our questions that really weren't correct. So it took a lot of our time. Much of the publicity was spiked also. In fact, they lie. I read in one article a spokesperson at the bank responded to a reporter at a paper saying the estate went bankrupt due to taxes. This is just a continuation of the big lie propaganda that federal felons, continue to engage in. They lie and deny. In fact, I have a friend whose family was in the insurance business and asked me why my husband didn't have insurance to pay all the estate taxes. So what kind of estate planning did White & Case and Bankers Trust Company prepare? Aside from attorneys, one of my stepsons, David, and one of my group and myself contacted the IRS directly and secured a meeting. At the meeting, the agent, Harvey Weiss, asked me if I received my marital deduction of $11 million, to which I said no, plus the other which was to be in trust. He spoke to us and then opened all the IRS records. He first telephoned Win Rutherford of White and Case, since we all understood he was the estate attorney at that time. At that time, of course, we were not aware that he had abandoned the estate by filing papers representing the bank for a loan to be paid back by my husband's estate. Legally, White and Case could not represent the bank, as I said before, and the estate, as we were told by the newspaper publisher, Ralph Martinelli, who met with Judge Albert Emanuele, he told Ralph about this. Plus, the bank is not listed as an executor on the letters testamentary as Bankers Trust Company. It's listed as Bankers Trust of New York, which came into existence 10 years later after my husband's death. As I stated before, but I really will emphasize that because these are very important things. Now, Harvey Weiss, the IRS agent, permitted us to make copies, and when we explained some things we had knowledge of, he was taken back. At one point, we were looking at the income-producing properties my husband owned and had many questions. My stepson, Eddie Jr., claimed partial ownership of the income-producing properties in the estate, and the IRS, in the estate tax audit, rejected any ownership he claimed, and the estate had to pay taxes based on 100% ownership, because basically Eddie could not prove he owned any of it. Also, we discovered that there were no partnership tax returns filed on any of these properties. When we brought this to Win Rutherford's attention of White and Case and the bank, Bankers Trust at that time, they had new appraisals done with the purpose to obtain a tax refund for the estate of over $500,000, as we were told. Harvey Weiss, the IRS agent, related that when he met with Rutherford, who was masquerading as the estate attorney, Rutherford handed Harvey Weiss the new paperwork. And when Harvey Weiss, the IRS agent, asked him what this was all about, Rutherford explained what he wanted. The IRS agent looked at him and said, "Listen, if you want a tax refund, we will reopen the whole estate." Upon hearing this, Rutherford grabbed the papers out of his hands and hurriedly left the office. In a hurry. Although Rutherford promised the tax refund, they never told us the facts until we heard it directly from the IRS what had transpired. Rutherford and the bank told us simply that the IRS would not do it and gave us no details. This all happened before we had contact with Harvey Weiss at IRS and found out what the true facts were. What a fraud. This ended up as a huge swindle with Eddie Jr. I must add here that the delegation of authority that I had signed before going to Russia, my group had discovered as we were reviewing things, I had forgotten about, and it was discovered, and they insisted, they checked and saw the records, and had me reinstate, immediately voided the document and revoked my delegations and reclaimed my powers as a legal executor of my husband's estate. They did a swindle with Eddie Jr. mainly during the time I was in Russia. Millions were lost. I'm trying to give facts, Glendora, chronologically. It's rather difficult because this is like 20 years ago that these things all took place, And it's amazing how the time has just flown by, because we were always busy trying to do things, either picketing, protesting, working on publicity, whatever. But I'll jump a minute to the present year, 2020, just for this one fact. That this past year, the bank, there was money in a couple separate accounts of the estate left there for many years. And I was getting statements every month for many years. But all of a sudden, this past June, I saw that they took out $600,000 out of the estate. I didn't know anything about it. Now, they claimed there was some kind of court thing that went on about it. But, you know, little dear old David Kiko of Pillsbury never telephoned me or discussed it. He knew very well I didn't even get my initial legacy, full legacy. He knew all this. But what do you have to do? Keep running to the judge who they have in their pockets? So they didn't really explain. So I wondered, what did they do with the $600,000? How in the world are they entitled to any legal fees or commissions? In the meantime, you know, they're not on the letters. It was all fraudulent. And it still is. So, to me, it's a complete fraud, like a lot of things we know today go on. But that was very clear. I did write a letter to them, asking them, one certified and one registered, and I believe they only received the one letter. The other was lost, I guess. It all went to the same address, but we're still investigating on that. But we asked about copies for the tax returns and all related documents to this amount of money that they withdrew from the account. But we got a reply from David Kiko, not from the trustee of the bank, which we wrote. They always turn it over to David Kiko. So he answered and wrote back. Effectively, he just told us to go away. I mean, they were paid for fees or whatever. Now, you know, it's quite upsetting. My life has been very upsetting with all these kind of things that occur. I'll go back again to the years that I'm speaking about in 1995. I think we're around that time now. When a firm like White & Case, professional firm like this, and Bankers Trust, I have here in my notes, why would a main beneficiary such as a wife have to fight the bank and the law firm to follow the will? Because they were not following the will. I hope people who listen to this understand the scheme that these people pull. It's intimidating for me and for my husband's name. They try to blame others like my stepson. Oh, he was difficult. Well, I thought they knew about these kind of things. That's why we hired them. They met with us many times before. They knew about the son. They knew about our whole situation. I don't understand. What were they hired for? Why are they getting paid? And now they're taking money out of the estate account for legal fees? What legal fees? What is justice for attorneys to fight for a beneficiary who's entitled to plenty of money that's on hand in the estate? As Win Rutherford stated, there's so much money in this estate it will never run out. Well, anyway, now back to the earlier years, as I say, around 1995. I was receiving checks from the IRS. Here's another very interesting item. I was receiving checks from the IRS for joint refunds from before date of death, made out to Suzanne and Edmund McCormick. So Honest Me reported this to a very pleasant trust officer who was always, oh, Suzanne, you know, we will do this, we will do that. Anyway, he was very pleasant and he was in charge of the estate. His reply was, just send us the check, Suzanne, and we will return whatever is yours. My part-time secretary did make a copy of one of the checks for $69,000. And I don't know, there were maybe 8 of them, I don't recall how many, to prove my name was on with my husband. So whatever checks appeared after, the bank had their name added to the check along with our names. So it went to them, and I never saw any of the money. They listed some of it in the final accounting, however, it was not complete, and I never received any of it. At least half of it had to be mine. The last building sold in the real estate portfolio was a large income-producing apartment building, which they did not have me listed as a grantor on the deed, even though I was a legal executor on the letters testamentary. They listed Bankers Trust Company as an executor of the estate, and further stated they were formerly known as Bankers Trust of New York. They put this all on the document, which is a total fraud. I mean, Bankers Trust, they didn't know what to say. They were probably asked, well, why is Bankers Trust of New York here? Oh, we were formerly known as that. They had other executors sign, including Eddie Jr., but not me. They knew I would object to all this. In fact, one of the interested parties who wanted the building telephoned me to say, Suzanne, we had offered a much larger amount. But I guess they knew, the bank knew. I told the fellas who called me to contact the bank since they were in charge. And as I understand, they sold it to the property manager they had chosen. Now, I might add, when my husband was living, he emphasized to me certain important issues. And the one, of course, was the legacy of $500,000, which was due 1 month after death. Remember, as I said, they had liquidated stocks and bonds amounting to $7 million at least. And, of course, there was a lot of other assets in the estate. All these years, 30 years, I've received about half of the $500,000 in 2 payments. I think I had said that previously in here. Anyway, and then the second thing was there was a trust to be formed, of which I would receive income plus interest in addition to an extra $50,000 a year. Plus, I had the extras given to me 2 homes in the art collection and possessions, and my husband's McCormick and Company. My husband now explained to me clearly about an option period he had in the will in regard to the real estate. My husband knew his son, Eddie Jr., would try to get whatever buildings of the real estate that he could. However, he said Eddie could not get them due to the capital gains tax. So he said, I'll give him 6 months to decide and 1 year to come up with any money. However, he said he will not be able to, because he's not able to, or he's not in a position to afford any buildings due to the capital gains tax. My husband was actually trying to protect me, as he explained, and his family. And as we know, the IRS disallowed any ownership by the son Eddie. When Rutherford knew that, what was the reason they were trying to please Eddie is what I am asking. What are they getting out of this besides legal fees? Legally, they abandoned the estate. Anyway, Eddie ended up with 2 excellent buildings after the swindle was done, which I called a swindle. One would have been a large asset for the estate in Summit, New Jersey. In regard to the option period, the children and I did speak up. After 1 year, we said time is up. Eddie could not come up with the money, as was explained to me. Well, when Rutherford said, let's give him a little more time. The children and I were getting very upset because they knew their brother, and in the end they wanted to disown him. They mentioned to me they were going to take him out of the family pictures. Now the son David with me went to the accountant's office, which was one of the executors, Herman Markowitz, and really quizzed him about what was going on. The accountant, Herman Markowitz, was very nervous and had trouble explaining his way out of this. The time period that Win Rutherford extended to accommodate Eddie got to be around 1.5 to 2 years. And also, who was billed for all these hours negotiating with Eddie? I imagine the estate. Win Rutherford of White and Case admitted to me that while I was in Russia, they spent hours and hours in Eddie's office, as I recall, dealing with him and negotiating with him, ending up with 2 buildings. There was a dispute of the ownership of certain property, and as I understand, Bankers Trust Company and White and Case were involved in other estates too that we heard about. We heard and met many people who had troubles with the bank, lawyers and judges, as I said before, because of course we were picketing and meeting a lot of people. Some prominent, some not so prominent. However, that doesn't matter. One of the people coming out of the bank spoke with us, and they said, they gave us copies of a segmentation of the bank, which was milk, exit, and ignore. What they would do is milk the estates, exit the estate, and then ignore it, which was explained in the market segmentation of Bankers Trust Company. And it can be viewed, if anyone wants to read it, on stopestatefraud.org or McCormickEstateFraud.wordpress.com. One person that we met was Jonathan Place from the Place family from Rye, New York. He worked with our group to get help for their family estate. Now, one of the things he did for us, which we also helped him, one of the people coming out of the bank also told us, ask them about their manual. So when Jonathan Place had a deposition with his attorneys, he said, could you tell us whether you have a manual? He asked the trust officer, William Wilkie, who was being deposed. And William Wilkie said, yes, we have one. However, when we had a deposition, we had our attorney ask William Wilkie if he had a manual. And he said, no, we don't have one. The manual was dated, by the way, prior to our deposition. So he perjured himself. This is the trust officer. He was in with Win Rutherford and the whole group. So after that, William Wilkie retired. Very interesting, but he wasn't there long. So he had been there for many years previously. Now, another thing, while we were listening, the judge at this time, I think that I'm up to, was Judge Anthony Scarpino. And we were listening to a local radio station, WFAS, one morning, and heard an in-depth interview, actually, of the new surrogate judge, Anthony Scarpino. And during the interview, we heard that he worked at the FBI for 4 years, and then he worked at Bankers Trust Company for 2 years. This was a major conflict, and he should have disqualified himself, involving all Bankers Trust matters before the surrogate court. I was told that he should have stepped down and, should have discontinued, not gone on with the case. And August 2002, the Sunday feature article in Newsday about trust and banks included a photo of me surrounded by 4 signs that I used while picketing. Bankers Trust Company, Deutsche Bank, and law firm of White and Case. One of the signs said Judge Scarpino worked for Bankers Trust. The name of the article was Inherited Problems. Now, when Anthony Scarpino saw this publicity I had, then he held it up. This was after 2 years I had mentioned it. It took that long before we got this publicity in. Then he held up the page with a photo in court and said, "I do not like this, but there's nothing I can do about it." Then he would entertain motions for disqualification or recusal. Papers were filed, and in January 2003, nothing had happened. So through a friend, I went to see the New York State Attorney, and after hearing what I said, she said, "I'm calling the New York State Attorney, Elliot Spitzer." In early February, it is my understanding that Elliot Spitzer summoned Anthony Scarpino, Judge Anthony Scarpino, to his office and had a sit-down talk with him. Shortly thereafter, Judge Scarpino recused himself from the McCormick estate. Finally. Then we were sent to Rockland County Surrogate Court that made one decision regarding the estate and then was withdrawn and threw the hot potato back to White Plains. Then the estate was moved to Dutchess County Surrogate Court with Judge Bagonis. My attorney at that time filed papers for the removal of Bankers Trust Company, Deutsche Bank, from the estate based on the fact that the nominated name was Bankers Trust Company was not named on the letters testamentary that the estate attorney had procured, and nothing happened for years. Eddie Jr. wrote a letter, and it stirred the pot, and the court in Dutchess County looked into the matter, asking about the status of the estate. Since I was not informed, some years later, I and one of my group went to Poughkeepsie Surrogate Court, where Judge Bagonis was, to go through the files. Now, Glendora, I'm going to stop here. This is the end of this episode, and thank you very much for listening, and I'll go to the next one next week. Thank you.